So we'll be discussing your research proposals. I'll be uploading your research proposals after this class so you don't get too depressed if when you see it, joke lang. Okay naman yung research proposals nyo, just have a number of comments. So some common issues regarding your research proposals. So first, lack of research contextualization. This pertains to that section in the research proposal after the introduction. And then in the introduction, you're supposed to discuss first the background of the problem. So why is this what is the problem? Why is this a problem? And so on. And then the second part of the introduction is your research context. So in the research context, you are supposed to synthesize the extant meaning existing. So the purpose of this section, the research context section, is for you to synthesize and to synthesize the relevant extant literature and to contextualize your proposed study within the body of related research that has already been done by other scholars and writers. So if you recall, what characterizes academic writing is that it dialogues with, builds on, uses, refers to existing scholarly writing. So the research context, you can think of this as like your review of the related literature. That's another term for it. But I prefer research context because it emphasizes that your particular study exists in a particular research context. Kasi pag sinabi mong related literature, the tendency is for students or for writers in general to just include whatever is, related to their keywords or something. That's not always the case. Kasi not everything that is related to your topic is part of the context of your research. So yung bringing up the notion of context surfaces the relational nature of academic writing. Now, your writing does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs in relation to specific literature and or specific sources that you have chosen for your purposes to include in your study. So it's not like you're just gonna put in whatever is related to your topic, but in creating a research context, you are creating like a frame, a critical frame within which to understand your particular study. So when you write the research context or when you write a literature review, you also have to ask yourself, how will my study build on, contribute to, interrogate, that is question, or challenge or reframe existing studies? So what is the particular contribution of my research to ongoing conversations about the issue or the research problem? So these are the questions that you need to keep in mind whenever you write this section, the research context and the review of related literature. So that's why I had you do an annotated bibliography, kasi you won't be able to synthesize anything for your research context if you don't know what has been written about your particular topic. So ideally, the research context section is where you synthesize the main findings that you got after compiling your annotated bibliography, like what has been said, what is the role, what has been said, and how does my own study fit into or add to, contribute to what has already been said about my topic. If there are any questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand. Okay. And then another issue with the research proposal and annotated bibliography, these are not common issues sa annotated bibliography, general formatting mistakes. So most of you tried to do like a mix of CMOS and APA, and sometimes sometimes often the formatting, the citation format used is not consistent. So iba yung in-text citation, iba yung format na in-text citation, tapos iba yung format sa bibliography. So just be consistent in your use of format. So kung APA lahat yan, from the in-text citation to the bibliography. If you're gonna use CMOS, use it consistently. So annotated bibliography. Please arrange your sources in alphabetical order. So even if you subdivide your annotated bibliography according to subtopics, so you have a main topic and then you have subtopics, even if you do that, please arrange your sources in alphabetical order. So some other problems, some sources that were cited were not really relevant to the research topic. So parang nilagay lang doon. Or relevant siya generally, but the context is far too different to be relevant to the particular context of your particular topic. So for example, some of you may be writing about topics that are very, embedded in the local context, tapos yung nasa citation ay Euro-American context. Minsan, hindi pala minsan, madalas hindi yun commensurable. Like the Euro-American context is not often applicable to the local context. So you also want to question the context of the research that you are citing, and whether the research that you are citing, the context of the research that you are citing, is comparable with the Philippine context in which your particular research project is embedded. So you also have to ask questions like that. And then another common mistake, scope and methodology. So the scope and methodology may not be detailed enough. Like somebody may say, I did purposive sampling, but what does purposive sampling actually mean concretely? For example, those of you who wrote that they're gonna do surveys and questionnaires did not specify the number of research participants, the number of questions in the survey, how the data will be collected and assessed, etc. So those concerns are part of research design, and you have to include those concerns in writing the research proposal and annotated bibliography. You have to include all of that, the research design. Kasi the purpose of the research proposal is for the assessor to evaluate whether what you propose is actually feasible for the constraints of the project. So in the context of this class, your main constraint is time. Because I think most of you are taking 18 units and you have like 20 days to write this paper. So those of you who plan to do primary research, na parang yung iba, some of you even propose to do field research, like going to a public high school, observing classes for a number of weeks. Parang how will you have time to do all of that na you're taking 18 units, this is just one class among many. You're gonna write a paper in 20 days. So how will you do all of that? So my suggestion really is to rely primarily on existing research rather than doing primary research. Because primary research is too, unless you're doing primary research, na andyan na yung data mo. So for example, forms of primary research na andyan na yung data mo, may mga textbooks ka na natitingnan, or meron ka ng mga syllabus na aaralin, or meron ka ng mga existing research that you want to synthesize and do a meta-analysis of, mga ganon. But if you're gonna collect data on your own, I would suggest that you reconsider because of the time constraint. And also, I will not let you administer surveys without checking your surveys first. So you have to send me your survey form. You have to because any kind of research that may involve human participants should have like an ethics review. So you'll have to send me your research design, your questionnaire, a plan of how you plan to analyze the data, a plan for recruiting participants. You have to also consider whether the recruitment of participants is done in an ethical manner, mga ganon. So research involving human subjects is kind of complicated. And it follows a number of steps. So syempre, hindi ko lang din kayo hahayaan na mag-administer ng survey na I'll also need to check the survey, etc. So if you plan to do primary research, especially involving like interviews and surveys, you have to run it by me first, and then ayun. So I would suggest that you, if you can, write a paper that doesn't involve like doing a study like that because it takes too much time. But if you want to do it, okay lang din naman. Like you can spend all of your weekends. Like it depends on the level of commitment that you want to give. Kasi yun nga, the research like that takes a lot of time. Now, if you are prepared to commit time and effort to actualize a research design like that, then go ahead. But if you do not want to commit that much time to it, then I suggest that you reconsider your method. That's also a problem in my previous English 13s na, kasi I get, UP students that are very ambitious, and I'm not saying that in a bad sense. Parang it's good na they want to create something substantial, but then yun nga nagkakaroon ng INC kasi hindi natatapos within the time frame. So just think of it as, a requirement. Well, on the one hand, you want to do something that feels meaningful to you, di ba? Para hindi naman sayang yung effort niyo sa pagsusulat ng paper. But on the other hand, you also have to consider the time constraints. Other questions? None. Okay. Your concerns must be to clarify the problem to your reader, for your reader, clarify the problem, explain your question and contextualize the question, present you not all papers have to have a separate methodology section, but you want to convey the impression that in answering your problem, you did something systematic. Kasi a method is simply a systematic way of solving something or accomplishing something. Kung walang sistema behind what you did, then it's not really a method. A method, again, is a systematic way of accomplishing something. So in your paper, you also have to convey to your audience that your way of approaching the problem and answering the question is systematic. So sometimes you don't need to write an entire methodology section, but you just have to explain briefly how you did what you did, how you got the answers that you presented in the paper. The methodology section is only important if you think that the method will be of value to other researchers who may want to replicate that method. So the methodology section is often used in the social sciences kasi some other researchers may encounter the same problem and they may want to know how you achieved your results or how you were able to answer your problem. So sometimes the methodology, or often the methodology section, is supposed to help other researchers replicate what you did. But if that is not the goal of your study, na allow other researchers to replicate what you did, then you don't need to write an extended methodology section. You can simply explain what you did in like 3 sentences or 1 brief paragraph. When you have a question, like yung diniscuss ko kanina, di ba, with the AKC essay, they have a question, they have a finding, and they explain the significance of the finding. They explain the implications of the finding. So it's not like you're going to say, these are the innovations, tapos na yon. You also have to ask further, and this goes for everyone. May sagot ka na sa tanong, and then ask again, so what? So what? And you have to answer the so what. Kasi the so what is what you will put in the conclusion, di ba? When you conclude your paper, hindi mo lang siya tatapusin na, eto na yung study ko. You have to explain to the audience, like what is the point for the audience to read your paper? Ano dapat ang nakuhang value ng mambabasa sa pagbabasa ng sinulat mo? As a person writing about this, you also have to help your audience understand how to contextualize this knowledge of learning innovations and to what end? Is it something that should be addressed as a national policy? Is it something that should be incorporated in learning design? You also have to explain how the knowledge that you produced can be applied, can be of use. So lahat ng mga tanong na yun ay kasama sa so what? Yeah. So that's again for everyone. Question, you have a question, research problem, you answer your research problem, and then you explain what is the significance of discussing all of that. So yung final so what, think about that, so what. Okay, so for those of you talking about online learning, I would encourage you to be very, very, very specific in your recommendations and not just ask questions like, is F2F better than online learning, or is online learning better than F2F? Kasi the answers to those questions depend on the context. Now, in some contexts, a blended mode of approach is better. In certain other contexts, for example, schools that are very poor and have students that come from very poor families who cannot afford devices, edi syempre hindi applicable yung online learning. They won't learn as much because they lack for material resources. So the question of whether something is good or bad is not universally answerable. Meaning, hindi siya one size fits all. Recommendations are never one size fits all because circumstances differ. So for all of you, if you're going to write something that involves a practical solution to a practical problem, you want to delimit the scope of your study to account for very specific circumstances. Because the answer again of whether something is good or bad depends on the context of implementation. So don't lose sight of that context of implementation. Because what works in one context will not necessarily work in another context. Those who are doing primary research, everyone doing interviews, surveys, etc., send me your research instruments, your surveys via email. Okay, as soon as you can, so I can give feedback on that. Okay, yeah. So thank you, everyone.